I want to shift gears just a little bit. I have a question from Ben Deniston in the basement on asteroids and scientific method. But before I get to the question per se, I want to say that today there was actually an exciting event. We had the transit of Venus, which we had a little while ago, a once-in-a-lifetime event. That happened again today as visible from Saturn, which we were, this is the first time that a deep space craft, we have the Cassini craft out there, was able to actually look at the transit of Venus. And there was some new science that was able to be done in terms of looking at the spectral signature and this kind of thing. So it's a very, very young science that we have right now. This is the very first time we've been able to do this. Also today, there were 3 major articles in the Huffington Post came out. One about defending the Earth from asteroids, one going through the KT extinction and asteroids defense for the survival of mankind, detection of large and middle-sized things, and mentioning the Tunguska event, which we have to invest in the defense of Earth in order to prevent that kind of thing. So that those articles also were published today. So to Ben's question per se, he says, Lynn, you have been recently pointing to the danger posed to the Earth by asteroids and comets. We know that asteroid impacts have been a regular part of the Earth's history and will continue to be in the future. We also know that impacts can be devastating to life on Earth. While estimates are that 99% of species that have ever lived on a planet have gone extinct, mankind has demonstrated a unique capability to potentially deal with threats like this by exercising his scientific capability and technological capabilities. Now, you have written for decades on the subject. Sorry, lost my place here. You have written for decades on the subject of science and scientific method, and on the destructive effects of the oligarchical system's attacks on scientific method. For example, you have repeatedly pointed to the fraud of the Isaac Newton Project and Newton's promoters, who attacked the historical scientific arc of Cusa, Kepler, and Leibniz, and instead introduced the fraudulent sense-perceptual conceptions of isolated bodies acting across absolute space and absolute time. Now, currently, we have to deal with threats coming from our solar system and beyond, such as the millions of undiscovered asteroids orbiting in our solar system, but our ability to truly understand these challenges is bounded by our scientific limitations. Do you think that false assumptions underlying scientific thought pose a particular threat to our ability to defend ourselves?
Yes, absolutely. We have 2 things that are factors to be considered. One is pseudoscience. That is the belief in what you see is what is there. That's pseudoscience. And you find that in the history of science that the progress means revolutions which are always based on discovering that the popular science of the period was nonsense. And that's what Newton represented. Everything that Newton ever proposed, was within about a decade had been proven wrong and actually intrinsically incompetent. So that's where the problem lies. Now skip ahead. Go to the 1890s and the beginning of that century, and you find some people who, including Einstein, who made some fundamental discoveries, including the matter-antimatter reaction thing, which most people still don't understand, and some other things which were of the same genre. So the point, every scientific discovery of any importance is a revolution. Now that's a nice word, revolution, because it doesn't say the predecessors were stupid. And what happens is people adopt and project popular ideas or popularized ideas and adopt these things as if they were truth, as if they represented value. When the point is, if you look at every crucial discovery made by anyone in science, or you can take another thing. If you don't like science, let's talk about classical drama, because the same thing is true in classical drama. And classical drama has the same principle. So therefore, it is like Shakespeare is a revolution. His ability to craft drama is astonishing, and there are other people who have similar that thing. So these two qualities of physical scientific capability and the ability to create the phenomenon of the experience of on a stage of great drama or great music are the same thing. They have exactly the same qualities. They are revolutions. They change, like Bach did. They change everything in a whole field, as Einstein did. He changed everything in a whole field. And therefore, the issue here is you don't solve the problem on the basis of trying to make a step forward and saying, now I've made a great discovery. It was always there. I always understood it secretly, and that kind of thing, right? The braggadocio. But the point is that every scientific discovery, which is a very significant scientific discovery, was something that no one had any idea of before. And therefore, the issue here is now, when we look at space, as Ben has raised this question, we look at space, and we say, okay, we don't know what the devil to do with these, some of these things. But we do know how to deal with asteroids, we think. But as I was discussing with Ben yesterday, the problem is we don't really know what we're doing. We are making certain assumptions about how the universe is organized, but nobody ever really tried to put together the plenum of these asteroids, which are particularly the part that's in between the orbit of Mars and the orbit of Venus. We never really put this thing together. We just assumed that they were all what mishmash out there is all waiting for us. And we were starting for a long period ago on what Gauss did in this direction. But you realize that there have been qualitative changes in the terms, qualitative terms in terms of ontology. And every great revolution in physical science and every great revolution in great classical drama is an ontological revolution. It is not a rearrangement of parts. We're now dealing with a point where we face a million or however of these asteroids stuffed between the Venus orbit and the Mars orbit. Millions of these things. That's the best estimate. We don't know how many are. We only know a relative handful of what these things that we're talking about dealing with. And we have no general program for dealing with this thing. We're going to have to effect an actual revolution in order to understand how to deal with this plenum of things between Mars orbit and Venus. And we just had a little shock recently about what could happen to us. So therefore, the issue here on science is you actually are making a revolution. You are bringing about a discovery of a principle you never recognized before or never knew before. And you're now bringing that principle into play. And therefore, you are giving mankind an insight into what a revolution he can make to advantage of humanity. Sometimes you make the revolution first and then try to find what to do with it. But sometimes it works the other way. But that's when we are. We're in a period where the stupidity we see, the pathological, that is the mental pathology, which takes over more and more of the youth population of this planet, in the United States in particular. The great rate of insanity among young people in the United States is actually horrifying. And there are great efforts to cover up how bad this thing is by many institutions. But we have a real bunch of poor unfortunates whose minds are not well balanced. And the rate of that is increasing. And the rate of increase since the assassination of President Kennedy. For example, take 1964, and look at from the death of Kennedy, look to the middle of the interval to 1984. And in the middle of there, you find already the drugs, not just drugs, but fantasies of drugs, absolute insanity, dominated. And what you saw in the 68ers at Columbia and elsewhere, the same thing. These guys were clinically insane. They were already deeply involved in drugs. They were absolutely useless in terms of production, useless in terms of all the things that are generally important in life. So the point here is we have to recognize that a society that is going to survive or deal with the challenge of these asteroids is going to have to make discoveries of things they don't yet believe. Because the problem of how to deal with 1 million or more of these asteroids, no one has got a clear head about what it's all about. We should just recognize that we've got a real problem because we know that there are a lot of these things out there. But how to manage them? Well, we can talk about ones and twos and programs ones and twos. Slow them down, steer them in this direction, steer them in that way, control them. But a few. But we're talking about millions. So therefore, we come to the point that we're entering a new world. For example, we're on Mars. Well, there's no one has yet discovered how to live on Mars. No human being. We know how we can create artificial systems, and they hope they will work. If not, sorry, buddy. But the point is, we are faced with situations which are unknown. Now, why do we do this? In my view, the reason we make these mistakes is because we wish to extrapolate on the basis of what we can pick up in textbooks that we know, manual textbook, learned utterances. And the fact of the matter is, we've never been there before. And we're going to have to find out what is there and what's been there and what will be there and how this thing works. Just like every other fundamental discovery we've made. And take Max Planck and Einstein, for example. Take their role in what they did. And that's an example. Take the work of Bernhard Riemann, who was understood to be a genius by his contemporaries when he was a young man and died early. But the importance of Riemann's work did not come until the discoveries of Planck and Einstein. So therefore, we have to understand that we have to develop a scientific cadre of a certain kind to say that the future is not the extrapolation of the present, either in quality or otherwise. And we have to recognize that we have to think about what it is that's wrong. The same thing comes up in drama, in classical drama. Now, I admit that these days it's very tough to find a good classical drama. The authorship may be excellent. The intentions of the author may be great. The intention of some of the performers may be great. But the saying is usually a piece of crap. And that's in music the same thing. Music is generally a piece of crap. It's learned crap, which means it's going backwards, essentially. So that's the issue, and the issue is all one piece. The classical drama, metaphor, the principle of metaphor, the same kind of principle in discoveries of universal physical principles. Again, the same thing. And all of these things involve discoveries of principles which were unknown to mankind before that time. And what stands before us now are principles which we have yet to discover in our time or beyond, which would never be understood without creating a discovery of that principle in time.
Well, that brings a conclusion to our broadcast tonight. That was the last question. I want to thank you, Lynn, for a very excellent presentation, and I also want to thank Lamari and Dennis for joining us tonight. Thank you for watching, and make sure you stay tuned to the LaRouche PAC website through the coming days, and tune in again next Friday at 8 p.m. Thank you again. Good night.